So, I've never really been the biggest fan of human rights activists, and one of those reasons is because I feel like they honestly just don't care about my nut. They don't. Until now. Because a human rights activist by the name of Boniface Mwangi has appealed to the Kenya Revenue Authority on confiscating and banning the sex toys that have been coming into the country. And would you look at that? He is now my favorite human rights activist. I'm not doing this just for the fun of it. Like, this is something that is actually very, very good. Not just as somebody that likes to talk about the conjugal arts, even though it's in one player mode in this case. This is something that's actually quite important, and he tried to bring out the importance of it because he felt that confiscating them and getting rid of them as they were coming into the country was robbing them of taxes, and they are the taxman. So why refuse something that can actually bring in more taxes? And I think he's actually onto something here. Because one, the KRA, well, according to the Kenyan government, sex toys are actually illegal. So you can't bring in your little Samantha or any other sex toy into the country. Of course, there's people that can do it through back-end channels, but it's actually illegal to have sex toys. But when you think about it, we are a nation full of people that like to fuck. And if you can't get most of your nut out with someone else, then why not do it yourself? And there's a lot of smartness in that when you think about it. So if you have more sex toys out in the market, one, the prices of sex toys could go down, and that might mean more revenue for them because they'll be collecting taxes on that shit both ways, in the name of VAT, in the name of customs and shit. And on top of that, the fact that there'll be more of them in the market, it means that the lot of Kenyans that like to fuck a lot, instead of them trying to go and get somebody, they'll be spending their money on a sex toy. And because most of them don't know how to use a sex toy, they'll probably end up fucking up and buying another sex toy, which means even more taxes. So this man is actually onto some very smart shit. Although then again, I could just be dumb and I could be making all of these comments because I have no idea what kind of impact this has to the general populace. So I'm just gonna kind of leave it at that and move on to something that I have a lot more experience in, which happens to be this podcast, which I should probably start. And I usually like to start by saying, welcome to Breaktime on West Side, your number one Breaktime podcast, coming to you from Nairobi, Kenya. The man on the mic is a man who believes in treating Samantha a little better, sex toy pun intended. He is a man who used to think that bukkake was a Japanese form of martial arts. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. The show is Tweetstreet, the show where we take a deep dive into Twitter, pull up a couple of tweets and break them down a little bit. Now, as usual, the drill is pretty simple. I usually make sure I repeat the drill so that each and every one of you, if you are listening to the episode for the first time, if it's your second time, if it's your 71st time, you get the drill so that you know where to send me the tweets if you want me to break them down. And it's usually a very simple drill. You can even recite it if you know it, and if you don't know it, then just listen, because it goes like this. You see that tweet, you like that tweet, you want us to discuss that tweet, you send that tweet. You send it to the DMs of @BagakaTheD, which happens to be my personal Twitter handle, and I will take it from there and I will handle it accordingly. If it is a screenshot, if it is a screen grab that you happen to find on Facebook or on IG, then you can send it to @Breaktime on Westside, and I will take it from there and I will handle it accordingly. Now, we should move it on to the tweets, but before we do that, I want us to go back to something that I was talking about last week. You remember how I was busy talking about how Will Smith and someone else were busy trying to change the whole topic of what it is that people are talking about them into something that makes them look better? Well, I come forth bearing another candidate of the same exact behavior. Now, sometime during the weekend and at the beginning of the week, a story came out where one of the social media influencers who's been around for a while here in Kenya, known as Rispa Faith, had come out to expose a certain artist who had gone and gotten some services from a company that she was working with, and she had refused to pay. Now, the artist in question is none other than Tanasha Donna, former radio presenter, influencer, and Diamond's baby mama, for those of y'all that don't know her. And the company was a company that specialized in cosmetic surgery. Now, she went for a BBL, she being Tanasha, and she was supposed to go do the BBL and then promote the company and talk about, their services and shit. But she went, she got the BBL, and she decided to go quiet. And that necessitated the company to slap her with an invoice of 850,000 Kenyan. Now, normally, you'd kind of look at that shit and you're like, you know what, it's one post, I can go, I can put it up, probably have it run for like a week, then take it back down or some shit. But she decided to go quiet and she decided to not pick up calls, and yes, now that 850k debt is sitting there. And to make matters worse, she hadn't even completed her procedure. And from what I've been told about Brazilian butt lifts, if you don't complete the procedure, because you know that in and of itself as a procedure in the entirety of the process is actually quite risky, you could pose even bigger risks to yourself. But instead of going back to the company and asking them to take down whatever it is that they said and say that it was a lie or some shit, and they can complete the procedure and she can do the post so she can pay the 850k, she decided to reach out and actually call out bloggers and talk about how they are not helping her in doing something constructive like promoting her music, which is nowhere near relevant to the fact that she went and got a BBL and refused to pay for it. So, in a sense, she's trying to make herself look like a victim here of targeting and bad press, instead of actually just coming out and saying, you know what, I had an agreement of such and such and this is what happened, or you know, probably she could have just kept quiet, but she decides to come out and talk about the whole music thing. And here's some of my questions for this, because you know, there's definitely somebody who might be thinking this that probably hasn't just said it out loud. First of all, is your music good enough that we should promote it? Like, people usually like talking about, oh, promote, but first of all, ask yourself, is it good enough to promote? And personally for me, I'm not a fan of her music. I've listened to one or two songs, they're okay at best, and honestly, I don't see that much to promote. Then secondly, besides the song that she released on the day when she decided to address the entire thing, she hasn't released music in about 6 months, so what exactly was there for her to promote? Don't get me wrong, I'm not against the idea of promoting an artist, but what was there to promote? Like, the bloggers got themselves a story on how you got a BBL and you don't want to pay for it, and you don't want to pay it in kind in the barter trade that was agreed upon, and you come up to say that we're not promoting you. If anything, when you actually think about it, there's actually nothing there for the bloggers to promote. And if anything, this is publicity. Like, there's that thing that people always say all the time, there's no such thing as bad publicity. So if anything, this is helping you. This is us promoting you. If us were to be the bloggers, because I'm not one of them. Like, why is it that she's suddenly picking a fight with bloggers saying, oh, you know, you don't promote me, busy playing the victim card? She's being promoted over here. It's just that she's being promoted with, you know, an unpaid BBL. So if anything, she's still gaining out of all of this. So at least if she's being promoted through bad publicity, then why can't she at least just go back and pay these people? Have them withdraw, say that it was a hoax. Get the influencers that leaked the story to come back and say, no, I had a grudge against her. Then people can doubt her credibility for like a week or some shit. Then they'll move on to the next trendy thing. Instead of coming out to start saying, why isn't it that these people aren't promoting me? You people just look at my downfall. You guys just want to talk about all the bad things that happened to me. Why is it that people can't just try and play things a little bit better? Like, going around the site trying to avoid the entire issue, like, that kind of escapism just usually looks very cowardly. But then again, I guess cowards do tend to live longer than some of us quote-unquote heroes, so maybe this was a much better tactic for her. Although I'd have honestly thought that if I was her, I'd have just posted up a picture showing that I have a much bigger booty now and using it to promote my music, because that would have been a much better way to avoid the entire thing, or at least to go around the entire thing, and maybe you can tag the company for like, I don't know, a week or maybe 2, and then you'll have gotten your full money's worth and shit, because you can go and say that yes, you agreed to post up for them and you wanted you posted up for them, and if anything, you didn't even have to do that much of a post. The whole idea was promoting them and you already did that shit. Like, that's a smart way of getting around this entire thing. And at least, you know, for niggas like us, we'd probably see if that booty was actually worth it or if it was just a joke. But anyways, that said, we should probably move it on to the tweet. So on to the very first tweet. Wait, you lot are telling your girl pals every time you link up with somebody? Like the group chat? Wow, that's hilarious. Alright, granted, I can kind of understand why babes would do this. Guys usually don't do it, so I'm not even gonna try and assume that guys do this, because I know it's babes that usually do this, and the person that did tweet this was a guy. And considering a lot of what babes can go through at the hands of, serial killers, weird homies and shit, I can understand why they do that, and I fully support it. I think it's good to actually prioritize your security. I just wish that most of y'all would do the same when you go to places like clubs and shit, but well, that's a discussion for a different time. Like, when you look at the shit that can happen to babes when they go on a random date with somebody they don't know, it kind of makes sense why they do that. And it would kind of be understandable to just about anyone who at least tries to think of their situation and the fact that, they need to be worried about their security. Because this is somebody that you don't know. You're going out on a date and there's someone that you don't know. Because I can remember last year, I think, there was a story about the guy that had gone to pick up this babe to take her out on a date and shit, and they had met up online or some shit, and she went and she started taking pictures of the license plate of like the car at the back and like the entire car and shit, and the guy ended up leaving her and saying, oh, if you can't trust me, blah blah blah. And I can remember how people were kind of enraged that shit happened, and I could understand both sides, because one side is like, if you can trust me enough to take you out on a date, then can't you trust me enough to not have to, make some paranoid shit up? And I totally understood that, and I could also understand where the babe was coming from. But because I know that I'm not most or all guys, and I cannot speak for every single man out there, and there are guys who might not know or understand this shit, then I feel like you should probably be a little bit more low-key about it. Because I do understand the need for safety, but you doing it outrightly can give somebody the wrong impression if they don't understand why you're doing it. So for the babes, I'd probably advise that you instead take an Uber. Don't necessarily have him pick you up. Just take an Uber instead. At least that one you can have tracked. And you can send a picture of the guy that you got from either WhatsApp or IG, wherever it is that you guys were hollering at each other from. Because it's not like you're going out on a date with somebody that you don't know. So if you're gonna send the picture to the group chat or to the babes or to your best friend, then do that and send, share your ride details and shit. So that if you know where it is you're meeting up, they'll know about it. If you are taking an Uber, they'll know about it. And they'll know the guy well enough that they can plaster his name and his details for the authorities in the likely event that he turns out to be some weirdo serial killer or some shit. Although at the same time, I think guys would probably benefit from this information as well. Although at the same time they wouldn't, because you don't hear that much about female serial killers taking guys out on dates. And most times for us guys, our fears and our problems with security don't usually come in before the relationship. They usually come in after. Because considering that most guys are typically stronger than the babes that they'll go out on dates with or that they'll date, you find that it's easier for the babe to not necessarily attack before the relationship, but rather during the relationship, which is why we tend to be a bit more scared of giving a babe the keys to the house. Because if you guys argue and she's the dramatic type, she can go and wreck all of your shit, of which a lot of that shit is very expensive. She can fake having a baby with you to get child support and shit. Like, our fears usually come when you're in the relationship, not before it. And the worst part about it is, it's very hard for us to kind of counter whatever issues that might arise in terms of our security, be it financial, be it physical, be it of any kind. But then again, that's a discussion for a different time, and we should probably move it on. So on to the next tweet. The feminine urge to marry a dominant and protective man who works hard and has him only having eyes for me is that over everything. Well, this is actually a pretty self-explanatory thing to kind of just state out, but the reason why I wanted to have this tweet here is because this sounds like a very, very realistic set of demands. Like, I'm used to seeing babes talking about soft life, if the man can't hold me all through the night, blah, blah, blah. I don't care if he turns. If he can't pay for me to go on trips, if he can't fuck me the entire night, I don't want him. Like, I'm used to hearing a lot of that shit on the internet, and you kind of get used to seeing the unrealistic demands. But when you find somebody talking about how she wants a dominant and protective man who works hard and only has eyes for her, like, that's actually very attainable. Like, okay, maybe the only having eyes for her might be a little bit harder, but for the most part, all of this shit is very attainable. Because one, it's not restricted to wealth, it's not restricted to lasting times in bed, and more so than that, like, this is something that you can find a lot of guys being able to do. And this is actually how you find women will kind of rate guys instead of looking for the whole monetary side of it. Because you find a lot of people talking about money this, money that, I want a guy that does 6 figures and shit. But when you actually pay attention to it, when you look at the natural selection, men are usually selected for their ability, their capability, and their resourcefulness. Like, those are the main things that determine it. The problem is, right now, wealth is quite possibly one of the biggest and best determinants of a man's capability. And while that could be a good determinant, there's people who might not really have as much wealth, but you find that in terms of things like influence and social capital, they're doing really, really well. Because I know guys that don't necessarily have that much cash, but they just need to make a phone call and shit can be done. They might not have the 50k for the bail when they're being taken to the cell, but they won't even check into that cell in the first place. And that kind of influence and power is actually something that would probably benefit a lot of women who might still be thinking that a man with a lot of money is a good catch. Also, at the same time, the fact that she says that she wants a protective man who works hard, like, it doesn't necessarily restrict it that much. The fact that he can be dominant, the fact that he can be protective, and the fact that he works hard pretty much fulfills the 3 main P's that most guys are supposed to hit at, which is provide, protect, and penetrate. Actually, no. Okay, yeah, when I actually think about the sex bit, yeah, he should also work hard in the bedroom. So, in a sense, this is probably the most realistic set of requirements that a babe has spoken about on the internet that I have seen this entire year. All I've been seeing is unrealistic shit. This is the most realistic one, and I honestly feel like this babe will have a much better pick of guys simply because she actually opened her set of options up a lot more, as opposed to a lot of these babes that go and restrict their numbers so much and then end up getting disappointed when the guy that they want probably doesn't want to be faithful with them or isn't even interested in them at all. But anyways, that said, let us move it on to our next tweet. When I tweet against masturbation, some young men flock the comment section with anger and resentment. They are slaves and prisoners of masturbation. 3 years later, they will struggle with erectile failure, low self-esteem, and blame their ex for bewitching them. Masturbation is unmanly. It takes away your masculine spirit. It deflates your life force. It turns you into a weak, effeminate man who cannot take control of his cravings in life. This makes you a vulnerable man who can easily be manipulated by toxic women. I respectfully disagree. I'm not fully disagreeing with everything that's been said, but I disagree with quite a bit of it. When you say that you talk against masturbation, I can kind of understand why. Because when you think about it, masturbation, especially for a lot of guys, is something that is very easy to get addicted to, because unlike alcohol, which you can go out and pay for, and if you run out of money, then you won't necessarily be having that much access to it. There's open and close times and shit. Unlike that, which will definitely have its own social rules and laws that kind of govern it, with masturbation, it's pretty much you having yourself as a drug of sorts. And you can access it at just about any time. You can do it as much as your body can allow it. So it's very easy for a lot of young guys who aren't getting some, who are horny, to go ahead and just fall into the trap of being addicted to the masturbation. And for that, yes, I do think that masturbation, if overdone, whatever version of overdone it is, can actually be harmful for you. But to say that 3 years later they'll struggle with erectile failure, low self-esteem, and blame their ex for bewitching them, I don't agree with that shit, because there's people who've masturbated for most of their lives. You might even find they're in their 40s and they started when they were teens or some shit, or maybe even their 20s, and they've managed to go on pretty well. And the idea with, consuming a drug or engaging in a certain vice of any kind is learning to control yourself. Like, that's the same shit with alcohol, it's the same shit with weed, with drugs and shit, hell, even sex. And while the majority of people will always talk about how, oh, such and such is bad for you, such and such is bad for you, for the most part, you actually realize that the people that learn to control themselves with it actually do either benefit or have zero negative effects, or if there are any negative effects at all, they're incredibly minimal. Because when you think about the research that always talks about, ejaculation at least 21 times a month can reduce prostate cancer for men by 50%, well, how many women will allow themselves to get fucked by a single dude 21 times in a month? How many babes, or at least how many guys can get a babe or babes to do that 21 times a month? Barely any. Like, there's a very, very small percentile of men. Like, even out of the 20% of guys that get all the ass, like, there's an even smaller percentage within that 20% that can actually do that on such a frequent basis. So a lot of guys will turn to something like masturbation. But the trick in all of this is control. If you can't learn to control, then you're the one that ends up losing. And that's where the people who get addicted kind of fall under. Because the people that aren't able to get any ass and choose to not put any effort at all and just choose to just sit back and simply masturbate the entire time and become addicted, well, they fall under this category. They're the ones that might definitely have self-esteem issues, because you're not approaching a porn star so that you can watch them get fucked. You're just keying in a couple of details and then you get, one, two, a couple of thousand, maybe even a million videos. As opposed to you hitting on a girl, which will raise your dopamine, and yes, you can get rejected, but if you learn to live with the rejection and push on, then you'll be a lot better off. So at the end of the day, if you can't control it, then don't bother getting into it. If you want to try finding out whether you can control it or not, then that's your risk to take. But at the end of the day, it's all about control and responsibility. If you learn to be responsible with yourself and you learn to control yourself, so that your urges to things like drugs, alcohol, and sex, ranging from stuff like, actually sleeping with somebody all the way till masturbation, then the cons that come with these same acts will either be minimized, or you probably might not even experience them at all. Although then again, I'm not a trained professional and I could be wrong about all of this, so I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On Twitter, you can slide into my personal handle, which is @BagakaTheD. Drop the DMs over there. On IG and Facebook, it is @BreakTimeOnWestside. You can reach out to me there and I will attend to it accordingly. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and if you are listening through Castbox, feel free to drop your thoughts and comments below and I will attend to them accordingly. If you are using an app that allows for ratings and reviews, a rating and or review will be appreciated greatly, and I will catch you guys on the next break.